I literally have a recent pickups video planned for next week. And here I am talking about insatiability in fashion. I already know I'm a hypocrite. You don't have to tell me. Welcome back. I'm Short, but you can call me Santov. Today I have a bit of a different video again, focusing a bit more on the psychology of fashion, or psychology of human behavior in general, I suppose. So today I wanted to talk about a phenomenon that I am myself way too familiar with, being insatiability. Meaning the inability to satisfy needs or wants. And fashion is sort of predicated on this phenomenon, making consumers buy new items every season, and this cycle is repeating itself every couple of months. But I was interested in kind of figuring out where does this come from? Where does this insatiable mind originate from, or why do we feel this way? At least I feel this way. But where does this insatiable desire for more come from? And also, how does fashion structure its business model around this phenomenon of insatiability? These are some of the questions that I'll try to not necessarily answer, but I'll delve a bit deeper into them and give some explanations for them, at least from my point of view as a neuroscience student. So let's just begin, I suppose. First of all, what I want to try to accomplish and what we need to do is to establish the origin of the insatiable mind. And in order to achieve that, we need to take a look at both economics as well as evolutionary psychology. When discussing insatiability, two terms come to mind, at least to me, which are greed and materialism. There is a definite distinction between the two. Studies have shown that greed differs between people, and that it is also intertwined with a lot of social comparison and envy. People who behave more greedy are often motivated to get ahead of people at the expense of other people. Materialism, on the other hand, is often associated with the desire to display social status and wealth. More generally speaking, several studies have reasoned that materialism is a way for someone to construct their identity through consumption. The last major distinction between greed and materialism is that materialism is often referring to luxury products, since we are trying to display status and wealth, etc. But greed can literally be referring to anything. It can be about basic necessities. It can be about abstract concepts such as love and affection, or time, or whatever. Therefore, insatiability in fashion is probably better described as a form of materialism, which makes sense, obviously, to me. But what drives this materialistic behavior? Studies by Jackson and Marks garner evidence to suggest that there is a form of pseudo-satisfaction which is very prominent, which means we try to use material goods to satisfy non-material needs, such as affection and participation or creativity. This kind of harkens back to my earlier video about our obsession with uniqueness, but that we always want to be liked, always want to be appreciated, always want to belong. But much of our behavior as economic consumers derives from our nature as biological beings or animals to attempt to maximize our genetic succession. This school of thought is in line with a popular theory, which is the The Selfish Gene, which is also an amazing book by Richard Dawkins. But this kind of explains how our genetic makeup drives most of our behavior. And this concept of insatiability is often considered to be inherent to people, which is an example of essentialism, which means that we attribute behavior to inherent properties. But another way of looking at insatiability is as a result of learned behavior with generalized reinforcers. Corporate power, innovative products, marketing, and social comparison processes. All of this creates an insatiable demand. This results in that there is a mindset or a moral imperative that the modern citizen must always consume and must constantly be ready to actualize all of his potential, all of his capacity to consume. Obviously, it is still heavily debated which is the case, whether it's mainly nature or mainly nurture, but as is the case with most behavior, it is probably a combination of both inherent properties, which I think are very real and have a tremendous evolutionary background, but also the result of learned behavior that we experience in a social group and in a capitalistic society. Now that we kind of established where it comes from, this insatiable desire, the insatiable mind, as you will, this leads us to the next subject or the next question in this video, which is, how does fashion structure its business model around this phenomenon? Or how does the fashion industry interact with our insatiable needs or insatiable wants? First, we have to discuss the theory of fashion, which describes the economics of the fashion industry. It does have a definite pariah status, if you will, in most microeconomic theories, because it deals with phenomena that are a bit too transient and a bit too bourgeois for general microeconomic theories to apply to, and which at the same time are too irrelevant for macroeconomics. There's an interesting paper by Chai and Potts. I'll try to leave a link in the description if you want to read it, in which they attempt to create a framework for a microeconomic theory for fashion, for the fashion industry. They argue that the introduction of a novel fashion trend in a consumer's environment acts as a potential trigger for consumers to reevaluate their consumption strategies. Now, these new consumption strategies that they adopt in response to a new stimulus turn into new habits, which is the case with any new learned behavior. As this new fashion trend, this new stimulus becomes normalized, novelty of the trend kind of disappears or dissipates. And eventually a point arrives where a newer stimulus is comparatively novel again for consumers to reevaluate their consumption strategies again, and this whole cycle starts all over again. Fashion cycles obviously play into this phenomenon and appear to play a very important role in encouraging flexibility and experimentation, because there's always new stimuli being presented. And this form of experimentation is a result of competition for social standing. And this competition is not merely based upon displays of how much money someone spends. Think of the unknown vlogs, how much is your outfit worth? But also on if someone places the right sort of fashion bets, if you will. Now, what the result of this might be is that consumers might end up as fashion victims when they fail to select either a strategy that the vast majority adopts at the same time, or if they fail to select a strategy whose minority status is considered to be in on it or hip. There is this constant need for participation, which is fueled by this fire of not wanting to fail and wanting to belong in one of these categories. And what you get is a very easy, manipulatable situation. Add to this the fact that the conventional economic view of the consumer as a rational self-maximizer of utility is very outdated and wildly criticized in both fields of economics as well as psychology. And what you get is a consumer who is easily manipulated by corporations due to social comparison, inherent properties, advertising, whatever, to invest in this lifestyle where novelty is king, and where corporations and companies are able to constantly feed this insatiable need for novelty. Now, I am very aware that this happens to me as well, especially since you and I are invested in the fashion industry. And what you notice is that the search for novelty is stronger compared to outgroups whose threshold for novelty is much higher, who do not care as much about fitting in terms of fashion or in terms of adopting new consumption strategies. But on the flip side, they might experience this in fields or lifestyles that they are invested in, which you and I might not be invested in at all. So this concept is very applicable to almost every market, every economic society. Whether or not our insatiability is inherent or the result of learned behavior in a capitalistic society, every industry, including the fashion industry, is aware of this phenomenon, and they know exactly how to position themselves to feed our insatiable need. Now, this sort of sums up some of the many theories that there are about insatiability and how it affects consumer trends, especially in a market like fashion, which uses the aspect of novelty a lot in their marketing and in their promotion. But it is still very superficial what I talked about here, and this could have easily been an hour and a half, 2-hour dissertation, but I'm not going to bore you with that. So if you're interested, definitely go do your own research. There's a lot more interesting theories out there. And thanks for watching. As always, next week, pickups, a bit of a lighter subject. So yeah, deuces.